When you're out on the ground, it's pretty easy to tell when you're walking uphill. As well as when you're walking downhill. Whee! Hi folks, I'm Craig Taylor, and as always, a huge thanks for joining me here on my YouTube channel, The Bushcraft Padawan. For those seasoned navigators and map readers amongst you, having listened to that introduction, you're probably thinking, Craig's going to talk about contour lines. Well, actually, I'm not. The reason I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, any detail really, about contour lines is because, in my opinion, there's an element, there's a degree of a learning curve associated with understanding contour lines. What is it? What does it represent? What does it mean? What does the spacing between them mean? Why is some thicker than others? What does the shape of them actually mean? There's a lot that can go into understanding contour lines. I actually think that there are three simpler ways of being able to determine up from down when you're just getting started with map reading and land navigation, which, remember, is what this video series is all about, getting started. Now, it's worth saying that these three simple tips that I'm going to give you may or may not be relevant on the mapping that you use. They are certainly relevant on the Ordnance Survey Great Britain 1 in 25,000 and 1 in 50,000 mapping that I use here in this country. They may or may not be relevant to you. Even if you are using the mapping that I use, depending on where you are, you may or may not see these three tips, these three features that I'm going to talk about. So they're true, they're factual, but they may not always apply to you and where you are and what you are using. The ethos, though, and the principles I'm talking about will still apply. Let's think firstly then about water. Water tends to, unless you live in some sort of parallel universe, water tends to flow downhill. The further downhill water gets, the more of it tends to have gathered, so there tends to be more water downhill than there is up a hill. Making sense so far? Think about that then. If you see a relatively thin, faint blue line, and you follow that line, if that line gets darker, gets thicker, gets more pronounced, that's a bloody good sign that there's a greater collection of water as you're following that blue water feature along. Therefore, you are following that water downhill. Consequently, if you follow your finger along the map and it's starting to get thinner, paler, less pronounced, there's a really good chance that you're following that water course up a hill. So therefore, water features can be a really good indicator about whether you are moving uphill or downhill. The slight caveat with that is, on occasions, if there are reservoirs or lakes high up a hillside somewhere, you can often find huge bodies of water with thin streams, thin drainage streams trickling off them. So a little bit of common sense, but 9 times out of 10, the thinner or thicker a water feature is, a stream, a river, etc., the higher up or lower down it's likely to be. Water features. Let's look next at gradient markers on roads. If you look at the image that's on the screen now, you'll notice that there is a yellow road running roughly from top to bottom of the screen. If you look along that road, you'll notice that in the top half there is a gradient marker. It's a chevron. It's a little bit like a black arrowhead pointing downwards. If you look further down the road, heading south, you'll notice that there is another gradient marker, another one of those black chevrons, those arrowheads pointing upwards. Whenever you see a gradient marker on the road, sometimes they're singular, as you can see in the picture, and sometimes they're a double chevron. Whenever you see them, you can guarantee that you're on a fairly steep piece of road. The way that this can help you understand whether you are heading uphill or downhill is the tip of that chevron, the tip of the arrowhead is always pointing downhill. So regardless of whether it's a double chevron or a single chevron, regarding whether it's a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 7 incline, kind of doesn't matter, although clearly one's going to be much steeper than the other. It's the direction that that chevron is pointing in indicates whether it's flowing, or indicates whether you're heading downhill or uphill. If you notice on this image that's on the screen, both of those chevrons are pointing towards one another. If you meet those chevrons somewhere in the middle, you'll notice that there is a stream, a river flowing underneath or across that road. Rivers and streams tend to form in lower lying areas. So you can now get a sense that one of those chevrons is pointing downhill, the other one is pointing downhill, get to the bottom, and that's where the stream bed is. So that's another simple way of being able to identify if you are on or near a road in your area. If it's incredibly steep, it probably have one of those chevron markers on it, or a couple of those chevron markers on it. Those tips of those chevrons always point downhill. The third and final tip to help you better understand whether you're heading uphill or downhill is to look at the contour lines. Now, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about contour lines, and I'm kind of not. It's not really the contour lines that we're looking at. It's the numbers that will appear on certain contour lines on your map. If you look at the image that's on the screen now, you can see that there is an area covered in sort of brown wavy lines. Ignore the contour lines if you want. It's the numbers, the 150, the 170, the 200 that I'm interested in. Look at those numbers, 150, 170, 200. The tops of those numbers, so the top of the number 1, the top of the number 5, the top of the number 0, they are heading uphill. The top of the 1 is actually higher than the bottom of the 1. The top of the number 5 is higher than the bottom of the number 5. So those contour markings, the numbers on those contour lines, always read legibly uphill. If you're reading a contour line and the numbers are upside down, you are reading downhill. So there are 3 very simple ways of being able to determine whether you are heading uphill or downhill without really having to understand contour lines as such. Remember, water flows downhill. Therefore, the thinner the water course, the fainter it is, the higher up you're likely to be. The thicker it is, the darker it is, the wider it is, greater likelihood of you being further downhill. If you're in an incredibly steep area with roads, those roads may have chevron markers on them to indicate a steep gradient. The tips of those chevrons always point downhill. And finally, contour numbers always read uphill. The top of that number as you read it is higher than the bottom of the number. If the number appears to be upside down, you're reading that contour line, you're reading that slope downhill. If it's the right way up, you're reading that contour marking uphill. I hope you've enjoyed this video, folks. Most people tend to jump on the bandwagon of working out slopes and height differences and height gains and so on, or uphill or downhill based upon contour lines. If you're familiar with them, still do that. That's what I tend to do, to be honest. But for those of you starting out, just getting a map for the first time, figuring out, am I going uphill or downhill? Those are 3 simple, easily recognizable, fairly intuitive when you think about it, ways of being able to determine up from down. I hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up. There are a few people that vote my videos down within seconds of them being uploaded, not even having the chance to watch them. There's nothing I can do about that. But you can help me combat that if you'd be so kind by giving the video a thumbs up. Help to push their dislikes down. Thank you. If you're not yet a subscriber, What are you doing with yourselves? In the bottom right hand corner of your screen there's been a little red button for the last few minutes. Please do click on that and you'll become a subscriber. Share the video within your network if you think there are other people that would value from it. As always, a massive thanks for taking time out of your day, your evening, your weekend, whenever it was, to catch this video. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a good week and I'll see you very shortly. Cheers.